Great to meet everybody. I'm Tehran. I am currently the new director at Urban Art Space. Thank you.
Yay.
I appreciate that. I've been with Urban Art Space for going on 4 years. My previous position was manager of community learning and experience. And so I'm really passionate about this project. The Artist Commune Journal kind of stems from our Artist Commune series, which is always about engagement and working with and within the community, community artists, and community meaning broad, right? Meaning university, meaning students, local artists, etc.
Yes.
And this opportunity is funded by the Global Arts and Humanities Department at OSU, as well as the Office of Engagement. So I want to give a big shout out to them for making this happen. And this will be our second iteration. So, we're really excited to move forward.
Yes, fantastic. And I'm Diane Coleman. So also I write under the name Diane Callahan. So same person. I am the Arts Marketing Online Strategy Manager here at Urban Arts Space. I've been here for about 3 years. And then also my previous background to this was as a literary editor. So I would edit novels, edit short stories. So I served as the fiction editor for a literary magazine called Consequence about the human consequences of war and geopolitical violence. And so I've kind of taken those experiences towards editing the journal and things like layout and the process for it. So I do some the more the project management side of the journal. And then I wanted to start by showing everybody the first issue in the full spread layout. So it was a print version and it was also online. And I'll share my screen here. And this is also available on our website, and I'll show you where to find that. But I just kind of wanted to give you like the personal behind the scenes view of it. So this is our cover, which is a gorgeous art by Artist Cohen. And so we are looking for somebody to submit cover art for consideration. And we're thinking of having the same sizing as well. And for our first issue, the theme was care, culture, justice. And so we have like a different theme for each issue. This one was specifically around like community of care. And then so every artist would have to submit how their work connected to the theme. And then we also, so we had some kind of about, but in the table of contents here, you'll see like the full span of the artist. And these are actually color coded by the different genre of the art. So some of them we have like, we have poetry is this dark blue, and we have like more visual art, like collage style things in yellow. And then there are, yeah, and also some paintings. And then these green ones are like essays. And so that's like it's really interesting to just see the full range of different types of things. And these red are like video or animation related ones. So you can kind of see like we have a huge swath of different types of art. So that's like a poem. Kai Smiley was one of our featured artists, and he got that position by being the highest scoring artist in the submission pool. And so we decided to publish all of his pieces and all of his artist statements. So
Wow.
artists can submit like I think a maximum of 5 pieces. And then so we had an essay here, more of an academic essay that we did as like a 2 column. We do like to have photos with the essays when possible. And let me see here, I have other types. So this one was a really excellent piece, Asher Pollock's essay, because the thing about this is that Asher tied in their experience painting murals with like their teaching experience. So they show examples of their murals, they talk about the process, they talk about the education behind it. And so that was something that we were really looking for was like, okay, how are you, connecting art and your artistic practice to community? So yeah, we have a huge variety. Really excellent student designer Nancy Hull designed this. So it's so lovely how they laid it out with this. And we also had an artist interview in here where we wanted the artist to have like, photos of their work. This was from submitted by Wild Goose Creative. So we do have submissions that are submitted on an organizational level. And this one was also kind of a group project, the Looking for Miriam one. So this was like a film. And since it was a video submission, obviously we can't embed that into the print version, but we were able to put the QR code here for there's one QR code for the film and one for like the full list of all the credits in there. And so that way it's something even in print form we can access the video. And then on the online version, it's just like an embedded video or a link to the video. So, and we had the same thing with like there was one that had video stills. Oh, this one here. So this one had like this is actually an animation, and we did 4 different video stills from it, and then you can view the animation through this QR code as well. And actually, what people submitted for their artist statement on the form is what we use for the text that goes with each image. So we basically used whatever the artist had submitted, and then had that as like the supplementary text to give context for the piece and particularly how it connects to the theme. And so whatever you end up submitting on the form might be used in the actual journal. So that's why we really take that into heavy consideration when we're evaluating pieces. And so yeah, it's like just a really huge variety. I definitely encourage people to look through this. This is another like wonderful piece by an artist like Ayat who had an essay. So it's like a more academic essay, but then it's interspersed with photos of her work and her artistic practice. And like it was sort of a body of work that she was uh, analyzing and providing the larger themes for it. So yeah, so there's lots of possibilities, and you're not limited to any of the things that we list. Like if you have an idea that you're like, well, you don't list that, you take this kind of art, but like, submit it. We'll absolutely consider it. We're really looking for out of the box thinking. But yes, anything to add to that before I go to the form?
No, I think that was amazing. And then one point, so the themes, right, of this previous one and this new one, they're general enough and open enough to incorporate a lot of different things. We do that on purpose, right? We don't want to be exclusive. We want to have some consistency in what we're looking for, but also leave that up to your artistic freedom and creativity to understand or to convey how your work, your process, your practice relates to the call.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And I also wanted to share now where you can find all of that information about the theme and about the past issue. So right now on the website through October 15th, sorry, I'm making sure I'm on the right page. There we go. And you can go to the front page, the uas.osu.edu, and then on the front page, there is a big red button that says Journal Submission Call. If that for some reason isn't there, under the menu, it's also under Artist Commune, and then there's an Artist Commune Journal on the top there, and that will bring you to the whole page about the journal. So like the mission of the journal is to focus on the community arts and to focus on community engagement and arts research. And arts research is something that we define very broadly. Like even just the practice of making art is arts research. And so that's why we also consider like all these different forms, like project organization spotlights. I really would love to see more comics because we didn't get any the first issue, and I didn't include fiction on here, which is strange because fiction is my background. And I was like, wait, I forgot to ask for fiction. I need some fiction in this as well. So I'd love to have a wider variety of work. And so you can see the issue one here. Like if you click on that button, it'll bring you to this page. And then you can see the PDF I just showed you here. Or if it's more accessible for you, you can click on the individual ones and they have like the featured artist page. Like here, like there's audio clips for some of the pieces and text so that you can like view it more easily on an individual level, or if you use something like a screen reader. And so that's the online version. It has our full list of contributors. And then we have the submission guidelines for issue 2 here. And that one, so you can just go to the submit here and that will open up the form, which has the same guidelines as on the previous page. And as Tron mentioned, it's a practice, praxis, process is the theme. And we kind of unpack each one here and like maybe possibilities for those. And maybe Tron, you can dive into that more. You're better at the terminology.
Yeah, I'll try not to get too jargony and keep it very concise. But practice, right, can encompass individual ways of working, individual ways of knowing, and kind of that embodied experience. And you see some of the possibilities that could be in there: a personal essay about artistic technique, a video showing your annual event, etc. Praxis speaks to a evolution of that practice, and you're thinking about it more now in terms of a body of work or across multiple things, or even in collaboration. So praxis becomes about applying that knowledge that happens through practice to creative works, to ways of engaging, new possibilities, anything like that, right? So again, the possibilities could be a workshop, and you're talking about that, a poem that turns into, literary theory on its head, or that deconstructs something,
Mhm.
challenges something. And in process, acknowledges the creation of work, right? So at times, as artists and creatives, we focus on the end piece, which is important, But equally as important is the process and how we got there, right? What was learned in that process? What was experienced? What were challenges? And then how do we get through that to this end piece? So it really looks at those in-between times from start to finish as artwork and as research in and of itself.
Yes, absolutely. So I really think that like it's you don't have to get too hung up on the individual definitions. Like you can connect it to one of these, you can connect it to all of them somehow, and or you can have your own definition of these terms. That's like this is how I connect it to my work. Like we're not super picky about like okay, restate the question according to our definition of it. We're just trying to get at like that those larger themes that Tehran mentioned there. And in terms of what we're looking for, this is not an exhaustive list, but I do try to put some limitations on things just to make it easier. So artwork, we do have up to 3 pieces, but I think that you have like the opportunity to attach 5 files. So say you have an essay and then you have 3 images, I think you should be able to attach that. Or you can have an essay with images embedded in it, such as the ones that you saw in the issue one. So, and because sometimes we have accepted pieces like essays, and then we asked if they had any images to go with it. But we find that it is really strong to have an essay that already has like images in mind for it. And then the other limitations are, 4,000 words for arts research, which could be essays or fiction. That's just because we have limited page space and it's much easier to like format and keep people's attention in that kind of shorter format. And then, we don't really have limitations on community project organization spotlights just because I feel like they can take so many different forms. And with films, there's no length limitations or audio because those are things that they're stored online, so they're not taking up print room necessarily. So if you have an album or you have a documentary or like a full length feature length film, those things are something that you can submit. And let's see here. So we would like original works of art that haven't been published elsewhere, but I would say that, if you posted it to your social media and it's not like published anywhere else, I would be fine considering that. Um, which isn't necessarily the case for other types of magazines, but like here we're more interested in something that is, connected to your personal practice that hasn't been published in another magazine in some form. So like for example, if you've done a mural or you've showed a piece at an exhibition, like that's not really publishing it in like a printed form. We just want to be like the first ones who publish it in a printed form and have some sort of, connection to this theme, like some piece of writing that might go with it as well. And so having it in an exhibition does not count as like, publishing it somewhere. And then we do want the connection to the theme is very important. We want things that kind of challenge conventional boundaries and expand understanding because that relates to urban arts space's mission of challenging perceptions and deepening learning and increasing access to the arts. And then I do mention that we prefer shorter and mid-length pieces, and that's just because of space. And you can submit to multiple categories. So if you are like, well, I write poetry and I do art, so like, do I have to choose one? And it's like, no, you can do separate entries for each. Like, it would be maybe I'd be impressed if somebody did all of them. It would be a lot for us to go through, but like, we allow multiple submissions and any categories here. So if you happen to be a very multi-talented individual. And then we have some recommended file types. And if you have any issues with these, I recommend just submitting a document that has a link to that file, but you have to double, triple check that the link is publicly viewable because that's the number one mistake when people share links is like, oh, I can't view it, I need access. So just making sure it's accessible to anybody who opens the link. And we did decide that the contributors from issue one aren't eligible to submit to issue two just because we want to hear from new voices. And we will have you sign a contract. And the payment system for OSU takes a very long time, and they don't really let us initiate it until the publication is finished because it has to be considered a finished work. And so that's sort of a strange limitation on the university side. But the $150 payment, you will receive that like after the print release of it in April. And so and that could take a few months from there. But we made sure that everybody was paid for the first issue. And some people it takes a little longer if you are an Ohio State student or employee because the university like they count it as like a different sort of payment, and you might have more insight into that.
Yeah, not to get too much in the weeds, but if you are a employee, faculty, staff, or a student, the way OSU views this, this work is in combination with your normal work at OSU. So if you're a student, that may depend on your allotment or your scholarship or your annual account summary. So we have to kind of like work with the institution in that regard. If you're faculty and staff, we have to work with those departments to ensure that the employee or the staff is in good standing, all the little nuanced things. So it takes a lot of time. So that's why we ask for you to check that box so we can kind of get ahead of it.
Mhm.
And the paperwork, honestly, is not the funnest thing, but it is a requirement, as well as that contract. So.
Mhm. Yes. So that's just the technical side, and just to kind of explain why the payment takes so long. And then we try to be very transparent about our review process, so there's no real like mysteries and like why a work is selected or not. And so we have a committee which is made up of several of our staff members, including myself, Tehran, Kate, another one of our arts administration professionals, and then I think we have roughly 5 or 6 interns who are on the committee, and then we're going to have several community members as well who are not affiliated with Urban Art Space and not affiliated with the university. And so that way we have like a wide range of views, and then everybody will individually look at all the submissions and rate them on an Excel spreadsheet on a rubric. And the rubric will look exactly like this, and the rating scale will be exactly like this. So you have like a possible 20 points, and then we're going to average all of the scores, and then we're going to rank all of the submissions. And so that's what we did for the first issue. And then we discussed all the submissions like on the kind of borderline to see how many artists we could end up including. And we actually ended up moving some of the money from the marketing budget because we liked so many of the submissions. We're like, oh, we need to accept a few more of these, past our cutoff. So we were able to move some of the grant money to that space. And I will note with the budget, I would say like the largest majority of it goes towards artist payments, towards that 150 per artist. So for the first issue, for example, that was 25 artists, each getting 150. And that does mean if you have like a group submission, it just goes to one person and then they distribute it. So like if you're 2 people submitting, you would split the $150 payment. That way we can pay as many artists as possible. Even though it is more of an honorarium, but because otherwise, if we had like one submission and we had to pay, 10 people 150, we'd be like, okay, we have no more money for any more submissions, just that one. So we're trying to pay as many different people as possible in this system. And so, yeah, so the criteria is really the quality and clarity of the work and materials. Like, okay, I can tell what they submitted, what it is, what it's trying to do, and that there's some degree of experimentation with the art, and then that there's some sort of community impact. So that kind of the arts community aspect, like, is it something that inspires conversations about arts and particularly about the arts in Columbus? Does it come from it like an interesting angle or a perspective that we haven't seen before? And then the alignment with the theme, I would say this one is very, very important because I think that if you're going to have a theme journal, like everybody who's reading it, they want to be like, oh, well, how does this piece even connect to the theme? If a reader is like, oh, how did this get accepted if it has nothing to do with this theme? So I really want to make that connection clear. Then we have a rough timeline here. So the deadline is October 15th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Um, and then we'll be like sorting submissions for a few days because we have to download them all, put them into folders. We label all of them, have a nice little organized spreadsheet, and send that to all of our reviewers. And they will have a few weeks to review all of them. And then we will have a decision meeting where we look at kind of like, okay, here's all our top ones. Do we want to like accept those? Here's our sort of edge case ones. What do we want to do with those? And then we can go forward with sending out final decisions. And you will most likely be getting an email from me from the UAS email account. And I will send also any sort of declines, and I will give the option to receive feedback if you would like. So if you want to have feedback, feel free to email me if you like, oh, my submission was declined. Will you tell me what my score was? Will you tell me what the comments were? And I can share those with you. And then we have a note here about just like the community aspect. And then, yes, if you have any questions, you can feel free to send it to that UAS email, or Tron and I directly is fine. I'm the one who monitors this, so you're basically just talking to me when you email it that. So, and then yeah, so this is all basic info. The stars are like required information. We would like a connection to Central Ohio. Like even if you don't live here anymore, like if you have some connection here, that's good too. The website's optional. Collaborators are optional. Same with Ohio State affiliations optional. And these are pretty clear, but if you want to be considered for the cover art, there is a checkbox here for visual artist. And even if the sizing isn't exactly the cover size, like we can always work on resizing that and things like that. And then so for your submission description, it's just like, what are you submitting? Like, what is the medium? Like, what is, like what is it? Like basically, like how would you describe this to somebody that like isn't even looking at the work? Like, what is its significance to you? And we asked for about 200 words, and then you could also follow the similar word guideline for 200 words here as well with the theme. And again, this is something that would likely, if your piece is accepted, this would be used in the print publication. So that's kind of why we want to have it on the shorter side so we could show the work and then we could have the statement. And the exception for this is like we typically do this with visual work. We'll include the statement, and then for poetry and like essays and things, we don't usually include it because like the work more readily speaks for itself unless the poem is doing something a little more experimental and it's like that gives it further context. Like we might do it in that case. So it's a little bit of a case by case basis, but and if you're a visual artist and you're like, I just want my work to stand on its own and no artist statement, we're totally fine with that too. As long as you just, submit this for the submission, but then on publication, you can feel free to be like, just put the work, no context there. And then we also asked for the artist bio of 50 words or fewer, and this is the artist bio that would go in the back of the journal. So all of them have contributor bios in the back of the first issue, and this just makes the process easier, so we don't have to ask you that for that later. And the files is pretty straightforward. So we have the file types, and then also it would be nice to have the artist name, piece title, so we can easily locate and make sure they're all in the folder. And then if you have any issues with attaching files, this is probably one of the number one problems because the upload, it only allows 5 MB limit. There's no way for us to increase that. So as you can imagine, that's a bit difficult. But if you wanted to shrink down your images and then you have higher quality images later, you can always, like, if your work is accepted, it will be like, hey, can you send high res versions of this? And then so don't worry that we're not going to be like, oh, the resolution of this image is only, 2 MB, we can't accept it. Like we won't be doing it based on the clarity of the image so much as like we'll be looking more at the quality of the work and not worrying so much about the file itself. Uh, but yeah, so I think that about goes through everything with the web form, and we can open it up for questions. Any sort of things that you're curious about or you're unsure about? Yes, Heather, feel free to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question. I published my first book last year. It was a book of poetry,
Congrats.
and it's had a really great reception on Amazon.
Nice.
My second book just came out last week.
Hmm.
And so that's another poetry book. And then my third book, which is a sequel to the first book, comes out tomorrow.
Wow, that's awesome.
So my question is, the book that just came out is called Flirting with Earth, a love letter.
Hmm.
And it's literally like my love letter to the earth. And there's a lot of entendres and double, triple, quad meaning. I mean, it's chock full of it. It's a lot of fun. It's really spicy. My question is, because it's literally volume one, it's going to have a volume two next year, can I take an excerpt from the book and just start a whole new poem based off, like it's published, but I'm not sending you my book. I'm not sending you the poetry that's already been published. I might take like say 4 to 8 lines and just kind of build on that based around the theme of your publication. Is that a possibility without you guys going, oh, that's not, she already published it?
Let me go first.
Yeah, go.
So long story short, yes, and the short story long, that's not unheard of, at least in the academic space.
Hmm.
The crazy thing is sometimes like I have to cite myself when I'm doing new works. But since you will be the author of the poem or the the excerpt they're using, right?
Yes.
You will be the source, and then you can build on that to create something new.
Yeah, yeah. I think I see it as like riffing on something you've already created, which I think relates well to the idea of like process and practice and everything. Like, because I think
That
it,
was my
yeah,
thought.
the idea, yeah. Because I mean, I see a lot of poets where they'll have poems that have the same title, or they'll even borrow lines from like, themselves and they'll put that in there, like, so um, I think that counts as an original work because like, a higher percentage of the work is going to be original. It's just, yeah, basically
Oh,
quote,
big time. Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Okay. And then I noticed you guys said a limit of 3 poems. Is there like no more than 10 pages altogether? Um,
Yeah, I would say like the similar to the essays, like shorter is better, and particularly if it can fit on like 1 page or 2 pages, because like with the spreads, it looks better as like a 1 page spread or a 2 page spread. And our I think our sizes are it's slightly smaller than an 8.5 by 11, so like I think 7.5 by 10. And so I think that would just that would generally work better. I think we did have a couple of slightly longer poems in there. So if you look at the first issue, you'll sort of see that length, and I would say that's the maximum. One of them I was like, I feel like this poem is too long, but I think we accepted that one though. So I guess I'm also like just submit it and see what happens. I guess like okay,
right, right.
here's a long poem. Because yeah, the other thing is that sometimes the submission committee they have a lot of things to read, so they're like, oh my gosh, they sent a 10 page poem. I don't want to read this whole thing. Like that might be also like a tough thing audience wise for various people.
Got it. Okay.
Oh.
Thank
Any other questions? Or even if you don't want to speak them, you can drop them in the chat as well.
I
Yeah.
had a question. I love the theme. I'm really thinking a lot about all of these things. So it's kind of an opportunity to kind of formalize some of that thinking. But I had a question regarding the community project. Are those projects supposed to be like focused on Columbus, Ohio, or could they be projects that existed outside of there? But like I live in Columbus, and so I'm just thinking about what kinds of projects I might be able to speak on through this.
Yeah, so two things, and I think this will kind of get to the essence of your question. Community impact, like we're all for community impact no matter where it's at.
Mhm.
Oh,
Uh, and then the connection would be you,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that's the important thing. Like you are the connection that has the Ohio ties, but impact, right? We're not limiting and saying, oh, it can only be in Columbus. No, impact in community is broader than just proximity. So,
Yeah,
cool.
I
I
agree.
do have a follow-up really quick, if that's fine.
mhm.
Um, can you submit across more than one kind of genre?
Yes, for sure.
Oh,
Like I think you
okay.
can. Yeah. So if you're like, I have, a visual art piece that's unrelated to my essay piece, and then you can, I recommend submitting two separate forms if you're doing two separate genres, just because of
Okay.
file limits. So, mhm.
Cool. Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about I saw that in the first issue there was an interview that was conducted and submitted as one of the entries. I was just curious what the parameters are around interviews as far as should somebody from UAS staff be involved in the interview process, or is that something that can be done externally and then have like a transcript or recording submitted? Just wanted to make sure that we get that straight as well.
Yes, so the interview that was submitted through Wild Goose, they conducted that interview. So they had somebody from Wild Goose conducted the interview, and they had two artists answering the questions, and they submitted the interview in its entirety, which is a little easier for us because it's like the piece has already been created. We haven't had somebody submit like an interview request of like, here's a person that would be interviewed, and then like, and that's something we might consider, but it would be more effort on our end. Like it would be just a lot of time and coordination, and then we might not be sure if we don't know the person who would be interviewing would be like, oh, that's kind of hard for us to do that. So we do prefer that it's like an already completed interview that you've done, and then you just submit it for like publication here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll follow up. Definitely more work on our end, and depending on the situation, it could get into like a conflict of interest, right? So like we're doing the interviewing, and then that's the one that gets published. We don't want the audience to be like, oh, of course you published that one because you did it, right? So we want to kind of stray away if possible from any, not that it would be a conflict, but it could seem like a conflict, right?
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yes, okay, great. Yes, any other questions? That's good. Okay, that's awesome. And if anybody has questions later that you think of, feel free to email us. And yeah, we're really excited to see your submissions and see them all rolling in. That's what I'm I'm really pumped to read them. So really appreciate it. And we'll have this up on YouTube hopefully within like a week or two in case you need to reference it. So great. Yes.
Awesome.
Appreciate everybody.